Dr. Terry Plum is the Assistant Dean at Simmons Graduate School of Library and Information Science, GSLIS. He is responsible for GSLIS technology and the satellite site campus at Mount Holyoke. He teaches courses in evaluation and information and technology. He co-developed the Minds for Libraries protocol with Brindley Franklin. He presents and publishes on the evaluation of electronic resources and digital libraries. He has consulted internationally in library evaluation, library science education, and information technology training, most recently in Belarus, Liberia, and Vietnam. Please join me in welcoming Terry Plum.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Maxine told me that my charge was educating the eScience librarian, and I found it better to do what Maxine says. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I'm at Simmons, and we're not doing a whole lot of eScience. So in some manner, I think you might have done better by getting someone from Syracuse or getting someone from Illinois or Urbana-Champaign. But on the other hand, we're grappling with some of the same problems, and we've developed some environments that I want to show you so that we can get some criticism about that and see if we're on the right track for teaching students how to respond to this eScience environment. I'm also, this panel was really provocative. So before I launch in, I was very struck with the last conversation about records management and archives. The Simmons, 1/3 of our students start out as archivists. So when we talk about liaison librarians and subject librarians, that's not who we're really aimed at. So as I look at the data, I can see different levels. And I can see a subject liaison librarian level. And then on the metadata side, I can see an item level or metadata for that data. But archivists approach things differently. And so archivists would approach it at a folder or a series or a record or provenance level. And they would have a whole different approach to the data. And records management would have yet another approach where it's coming from the organization or who produced the data. And I was struck by the MIT software or the MIT talk where you were rolling off data at the back end, which is really a records management process. So, and they would have yet another approach to this. And then there's an approach like the Internet Archive and Brewster Cayley. So we gave Brewster Cayley an honorary degree just to get him on campus and to talk to him. And so we came up to him and said, so why don't you hire librarians? You know, you're doing a lot of good stuff. We need librarians up there. And he said, he claims he's an alum, but he took one course. So he didn't graduate. He said, librarians, they're enthralled by the cult of metadata. And his approach was no metadata, data mining, just throw all the data in a big pile and figure out how to get it later because somebody will figure it out. So we have these different levels, and it's really interesting in this process of what's the right level. And also, I'm also struck with, we tend to be talking about storage and preservation, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But the subtext is access. And do we really care about access? And if we don't care about access, then maybe the archival approach or a record group approach or not an item level approach is a better approach. Or if we have the Brewster Cayley, then there's just a series of queries on this giant data set. So that's the frame for what I'm going to talk about. And the attributes of the eScience education. And this is my taxonomy. So I think part of what we're doing is trying to figure out how to be digital and high touch or experiential. So I'll show you an environment which attempts to do that. It seems pretty clear that eScience has something to do with data focus, But I also, when I look on the web and I see e-science, it often drifts towards digital curation, digital stewardship, digital preservation. And I don't think that's it. I think that's a piece of it, but that's certainly not it. And that seems to be where the education is lying. The frame for my talk is going to be how to train librarians so they can get the jobs that you're setting up, that you're looking for. So that's what this is about. Also, it seems as though that the e-science education, we tend to focus on IT and data, but it's really the people and the collaborative piece that is probably the most important, because in the various talks, everyone was talking about working with the researchers, talking with them, that sort of thing. And again, you could look at that as a subject liaison responsibility. But archivists do that too. And archivists do that at a research level. And the digital archivist would be quite comfortable working with researchers in that kind of collaborative way that librarians tend to think is our, I'm a librarian, is our domain. IT focus, and there's a piece of that in the education. I'm also really interested in the analysis of the data. So if we really care about access, so we say, well, maybe we care, then what do we do with the data? Do we pull it out as queries, or do we simply say, here's the data set, have a nice time? And that's our access, because that would mean a different level of metadata, and it would also mean a different level of service. And it would mean a different level of expertise required of the people who have to provide access. So there's an analysis of the data. Is that our job? Is that SPSS? Is that database management systems? Or do we just say, here's a pile of data, have fun? The subject expertise or vocabulary, I see that as essential. So either you're really smart or you have some subject expertise in that area. You have to be able to control the vocabulary when you're talking to folk. And archivists do that, records managers do that, and librarians do that. And finally, behind all this is the breakdown in research and scholarly communication. So that would be something else that we would teach, because right now, of course, the process is pretty broken. But part of what we would be doing in the library school is teaching people sort of how to place themselves in this process. So this is a plug, but I figure we're okay. But again, this is not e-science. This is doing something different. So this is Digital Stewardship Certificate Online. And this is a 5-course program that just started 2 weeks ago. And it's teaching digital stewardship. And when you look at the courses are pretty traditional. There's a digital stewardship piece, which is digital curation, digital preservation, looking at the life cycle of the data. There's an archiving and preserving digital media, and where that course is going is into strange little open software thingies that help you to process data. So there's a checksum piece, there's an encapsulation piece, there's an ingest piece, and it turns out a lot of this work is being done outside the US. So Australia has a number of these, New Zealand has a number of these, Europe has a number of these. So those are being pulled together into this course. And this course is changing a lot. It wasn't this 2 years ago, but now it's a string of open source tools to work with data. Then there's an independent study or an internship, and this is to give the students some practice. There's an elective course, which is database management. It's very traditional. This gets into PHP, MySQL, but that's as far as it goes. Web development information architecture piece, XML. And the XML, you can do lots of different things with XML. You can drift it toward metadata. This is drifting toward programming. So it's XSLT, it's transformations of XML. And that's the approach that course is taking. And finally, there's a metadata course. The actual creativity to this digital stewardship certificate is a course that I'm trying to get involved with because it has the best title. It's called Dams for Lambs, and it's digital asset management in libraries, archives, and museums. So it's looking at a series of digital asset, or DAMs, digital asset management systems. And then here's the schedule. So that was the Digital Stewardship Certificate. So that was DSC. Now I'm going to talk about DCL, which is the Digital Curriculum Lab. And this is the high-touch experiential digital learning that we're trying to achieve, which I think could translate over into an e-science curriculum, although I'm not representing it as that now. And in this Digital Curriculum Lab, this is a Drupal front end. And this is the public side, so then you log in, and then you have a number of different things that you could, this is very Drupal-y, but it has applications, it has exercises, it has scenarios, which are sort of super exercises. It has resources, which is data, or the resources are links, and then the content is data, and then this is for instructors or teachers. You can create exercises in this environment. So what we've done is we've thrown in all the open source dams that we can think of that we could make go. And the ones that we have there, it's a little hard to see, but the ones we have there are Alfresco, Archivist Toolkit, Archon, Collective Access, which is really aimed at museums, DSpace, ePrints, Fedora, Greenstone, Omeka, Resource Space. And if somebody has something else that they're actually using, we're interested, and we can stick it in this environment. So this is for students. And we stuck with open source because we could control it. The students might indeed go and use Content DM, or in the museum world, there's two proprietary systems. There's MIMSI, as in MIMSI where the bar grows, and there's also the museum system, TMS. By Gallery Systems. And those are proprietary. So if we were really doing our job, we would train our students in those, and then they could put that on their resume as a resume ornament. But it's too hard to do proprietary with the licensing. And also, we're very interested in international partnerships. So as soon as you start talking international, the proprietary folk get very, very nervous. So we have a partnership now with UCL, University College at London. And we have a partnership with a university in Sweden called Mid-Sweden, which is Archives. And we're also working with NYU and, a little less exotically, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But we have outside non-Simmons people, so writing those licenses are too difficult. So we stayed with open source. So what are we doing with these? Here's Collective Access, which is a museum system. And behind the Digital Curriculum Lab, which again is not e-science, but what it's looking at is convergence. And I'm not certain convergence, I mean, everyone talks convergence, but I'm not certain I believe it. But it's a convergence of library approaches in the digital world, archival approaches in the digital world, and museum approaches in the digital world. And this was based on an IMLS and NHPRC grant. And the convergence of those approaches, to me, shows the divergence of the different ways of thinking that people bring to this. And I bet that you all, the e-science folk, think much differently as well. So I think the putative convergence is the digital object or the metadata. But in fact, the way that these are organized and the way they're approached from these different domains, and we could throw in records management, and we can throw in e-science in there as well, are very different. And it's important to keep an eye on that. Also, some of those differences play out in the digital asset management system. So I said museums tend to use MIMSI and TMS. In the open source, they can use Collective Space, which is really a collection management system, not a digital asset management system. And the approach there from museum folk is really different than the way librarians think. I mean, you want to see metadata. They have metadata. So part of what we're teaching the students is that when they move into this environment, there's a set of assumptions behind that environment that represents the cognitive approach of that discipline, with sort of manifested by metadata and manifested by software. So the software is not agnostic. The software is an advocate for certain types of approaches. So what we do for the students, there's CDWA Lite, which is the categories for descriptions of works of art. The unlight version has 500 fields. The light version has fewer. Coney Island is a public display. DC is Dublin Core, VRA Core, as you recognize. And so then we created some FAQs. We created some exemplars, which is sort of who's using this thing. We have the metadata standards, and there's some documentation. And then what we asked the students to do is to use these tools around a model. And in my experience, this is sort of a stereotyping, but my experience, the Europeans have much better models. We have much better data. So you go to a conference, they do their models, we do our data. And so this is the DCC model for the Digital Curation Center Curation Lifecycle. So what we did is we IMApped this thing. And so if this is presented to the students, so for example, if they chose ingest, they would have a series of exercises that are tied to ingesting data. And this could be e-science data, but right now it's more cultural heritage informatics data. And when you get down to the exercise, in this case, this is an encapsulation exercise, and the application they're using is called Xena, which is, I never remember what it stands for. It stands for Electronic Normalizing for Archives, and somehow they get Xena out of that. But Xena is open source, and also this Mac Windows thing, it's really a Mac thing, but we just say you got to figure it out in Windows, and we just have them download it. It's on SourceForge. And so they have to have certain IT skills to be able to survive in this environment. And we don't want to hear a lot of whining about it doesn't run. It's going to run. So, and then they use it to either do the tool that they're supposed to do or to interact with the digital asset management system that they're looking at. So we have some test content, and I was very interested to hear about that data serve thing, because that sounds like just the sort of thing that we could put up in this environment if it's what I understood it to be. So we could easily put open source tools in this environment for eScience, for data, and then fold that. So we're looking at this environment as a development teaching environment. So it's not a development production environment. I would look at the development production environment as something like Islandora with PEI or Hydra at Stanford. They have programmers. We have a programmer. So we have a development teaching environment that we're trying to get the students involved with. So these are data sets. There's a preservation folder. This is one of my favorites, miscellaneous files from the 1980s and 1990s in a zip file. So the exercise was figure out what this was. Regretfully, just based on the three-letter tail codes, I recognize most of them, which is a sad state. But the students don't, and they have to be able to figure out what these DBase2 files or whatever they are. Okay? So that's a piece of the preservation, or the digital curation. This is a model taken from the research libraries of UK. Well, so that's the digital curriculum lab and sort of what we're doing and kind of our approach to it. And I'd be interested in your comments at the end of this. But my charge from Maxine was to sort out education for eScience. So it looked to me as though the research libraries of the UK, even though this is old, it's not a bad approach. So there's a data manager, there's a data librarian, there's a data scientist, and there's a data creator. And then there's different functions or different skill sets associated with that. But at Simmons, we don't have all this stuff. We have sort of traditional library divisions. So one of our tasks was to try to figure out where eScience would fit into a library school approach. And Alvaro, in 2011, wrote an article called eScience Librarianship Field Undefined, which was provocative. And so it was quite interesting to me to see communication up at the top and collaboration up at the top and interpersonal skills up at the top and leadership, because I would agree with that. I think those are skills that you're looking for in the digital, the person who has these skills. We tend to think about it, well, you need to know Xena, you need to know this, you need to know Fedora. But in reality, maybe these skills are more important. The IT skills, again, science subject knowledge, which I would agree with, data and metadata, being able to teach, and then knowing some scripting or programming languages. So does this help a school like Simmons train an e-science librarian? So here's my take on this, and the first 3 items were taken from an article by Kim and others in 2011. So I think there's a digital curation approach, which we just showed. I think there's a database management piece. I think there's a data mining piece, although within data mining, you could fold metadata, both from the librarian point of view, the archivist's point of view with the AD&TI, or the records manager's point of view. And all of that would fold into the data mining piece. So there's a data piece. There's an IT piece. And the scripting or intro programming is probably what we're not doing now that we need to do. Project management, web development, information architecture. Sysadmin, we're not teaching that. Scripting, we're teaching that a little. And then there's this people focus, and particularly collaboration over distance. And this is where, we don't teach that. We require it in we do group work through various groupy tools that are cloudy tools that are online. But there's no course in that. It's just a skill set that's supposed to come out of the different courses. But what's missing from this Kim piece, which I thought was quite good, and I would say the subject expertise is missing, the analysis skills, but again, I think that's up to you. You would tell us, educators, you would tell us what kind of analysis skills the people that are going to handle this data need to have. Are they just going to be handing out data sets, or are they going to be doing something else? There's communication skills, there's leadership skills, and then there's research and scholarly communication, which is sort of a given. I'm not going to go into that. So the New England school, this is taken from the eScience portal, which is at UMass Medical, and it's really nice. So GSLIS, we're doing our digital stewardship certificate. Syracuse is doing things. North Carolina and Illinois are now apparently in New England. They're doing things. But it's all digital curation. I don't see a lot of e-science focus out there. And I would argue that digital curation is a piece of what these students need, but not maybe even a minority, not the majority of what they need. And if you want to go see my citations, they're on this website, and the Journal of eScience Librarianship looks pretty interesting and just started. So what I hoped is that you would then say, oh no, you're on the wrong track. Here's what you need to do. So if you have any comments on what we think we're doing, or what kind of skills or education you would like to see the students have, I would be really interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Plum. I know I've had too much coffee today and I'm talking too much. I apologize. But I'm an alum of Simmons, as are a huge number of people here. And we all appreciate the education we got because we're librarians. But I do worry about this high-touch approach as opposed to a more cutting-edge approach, and how this is going to serve future generations of librarians. It always seemed to me that my background was maybe a little bit behind the curve on certain things that I needed once I became a librarian, in terms of the technology aspects that we were still doing heavily into digital, heavily into print reference resources when I started the program in 2004, for instance. Yep. The late entrance into any sort of distance education. And now this, I really think that it's doing a disservice to future subject librarians, particularly in the sciences, if we're not having some emphasis on an e-science education. Because as you see, this is something that, people are going to be asked about in interviews. People are going to need to have some background in and be able to answer intelligently, even if they don't necessarily have the underpinning of the exact technical skills behind it. Mm-hmm. So that is something, as an alum, I'd like
Sure.
to see Simmons address.
So what would that course look like? Or what would it look like?
I'm not saying it even necessarily has to be a course, although I think that might be a good idea. There was the Literature of Science and Technology class that many of us took, and I think that having that address e-science particularly would capture a large number of the people for whom it would be extremely relevant.
Okay.
To have, at least one class on that on e-science. Maybe they do already. I don't know. I haven't talked to Howard Silver and the other people that have taught that recently about that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that every librarian has to be exposed to it, but I think it needs to be in the curriculum at this point. It's something that's hugely on the mind of all of us who do science librarianship.
Okay.
Thanks.
Enid's right. I think about the literature of science and technology, and it's certainly something on my mind right now. I think that beyond e-science, though, I think there are issues around, as you mentioned, the archives and records management. I know at the eScience Institute there was a strong move to call it e-research instead, because it involves so many other disciplines. And a lot of the principles that we were applying to e-science and data curation and things like that, the data mining of textual material and images is really big too. So I think it certainly goes beyond science.
So I'm a Syracuse grad. So I went to a pretty heavy IT data progressive school in this area. And I think one of the things I saw there, which I think about a lot being a librarian, is we're talking about all this interdisciplinary stuff and people needing different skill sets. And I really wonder if libraries are ready to open their doors to let other professionals come in and work under their roof who are not librarians to do this job. Are we willing to be interdisciplinary enough? And for that to happen, we would have to sacrifice some of our own positions, because the way the world is now, we don't hire extra staff, we swap people out. And so I wonder, when we're trying to build curriculum in our library schools, and I've stayed in touch with Syracuse as an active alum and talked to them a lot about what they're doing with e-science, and they're not producing people who we would think of as librarians. And some of them, yes, not overall, and are we willing to take in some of those folks? Are we willing to expand our thinking? I don't know the answer, but I think it's something that we need to think about professionally in this whole issue.
Just a response to that. Of course, I'm in the business, but I'm a lot more sanguine about the plasticity of librarians. So, and our profession's changing a lot. So often I find that people compare, when they say a traditional librarian, it's actually a librarian that's parked about 20 years ago. And that's not who we are. So.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, I just think overall as a profession, I hope we can start to think a little differently about who we are and be a little more open.
I don't know the answer to this, and perhaps you'll be able to speak to it. Librarianship was a second career for me, being degreed in science. And when I went to meet with Dean Matarazzo many, many years ago, he said, "You'll have a job because of the science background." But I thought, how many people such as myself just say, "Oh, I would like to combine science and librarianship"? I mean, not too many of us. Some, right? A few, right? But did the library schools go out and recruit you? And that's my question. Do library schools in general go out to universities, colleges, institutes, and say, here are the needs of our profession, and it's honorable, it pays, sometimes, but you get what I mean? And you're going to be able to do your passion in science and be parts of teams? And so that's my question to you.
Yeah, I think I can give you a Simmons answer and a more general answer. So Simmons face-to-face is still pretty regional. So it's still drawing from New England. The digital stewardship certificate, we did a little, just plotted it. And nobody's from Massachusetts. Everyone is from other places. So when you say recruit, then that has sort of two different meanings. And I think as we move online, which if we did an e-science certificate or an e-science program, like the archives program or something like that, my personal view is I would envision that as an online program. And then we're pushing things out much further, and then recruiting is much different. And that might address some of the issues about being behind the times. I didn't agree with the high touch means not technical. So, and you weren't really insisting on that, but so we want to be high touch and real technical. So, and I think part of the driver behind that is if we move it online, then there's a effort to do that. So the Digital Curriculum Lab is designed for online education. I mean, we're using it for face-to-face, but the vision behind it was that this would then serve as a high-touch experiential environment for digital archives, which, another plug, we're mounting the online archives program in September.
So you're saying that you feel that recruitment would come online rather than Simmons going out to colleges and universities or maybe any other library school?
I would say that recruitment is much different online. So we had a marketing group come in, and they secret shopped all the library schools for online programs. And they secret shopped us too. And where they would go was Drexel. So and they said most library schools were awful. They'd had you on the phone and they would refer you to the website. And in an online environment, you don't do that. If you get the person on the phone, you talk to them because they know the website. They can go look at that. So I think there's a whole different set of recruiting that goes on online that is not the same as would be face-to-face, and is certainly not the same as Simmons has been doing. Yeah.
So I came from UNC Chapel Hill, where I graduated about 10 years ago, and at the time, they were actually trying to address the issue that Regina talked about of how do you lure, mostly from their perspective, people in medicine and in science to come to the library field. And they beta tested actually coming up with a joint degree program with the medical school. And I don't believe that they have actually continued that program because it wasn't as successful, I think, as they had hoped it to be in terms of the number of people who actually followed through. But they do have a joint program with public health. And they also have, I think now they're starting one with the law school. But they haven't gone out to the departments of chemistry and mathematics and engineering and some of the other science schools to try to do something similar. And that would actually probably be useful. And I don't really know why they haven't done that. But, you know, they've even taken it to that further extent of trying to have a joint degree program. So.
Yeah, that's a really nice comment, because you could have the joint degrees, or you could have medical or health informatics, something like that, which brings things together. Trouble is, when I look at medical and health informatics, I see a lot of different things. It's not clear to me what the knowledge domain of that actually is. But that would be also one way to bring things together. Yeah. I can hear you.
I graduated from Simmons last fall, and I was interested to see that the classes that you showed in the digital curriculum lab and some of that path is mostly what I did on my own. And it seems that the people that I had classes with was all the same people, kind of straight through, and most of us have jobs. Whereas my friends that took classes in children's literature have much more trouble. So it's really what people make of it. There's certainly the option to pick up the technical skills that you need to be able to contribute in this e-science environment.
And those classes are changing. The XML class, their XML used Fedora in the digital curriculum lab as kind of the final project, and it seemed to work pretty well.
So I didn't go to Simmons. I went to URI. And at URI, we had the class on science and technology librarianship, and there was one on medical librarianship, and I think there was one on humanities. And I assume there's a similar approach at Simmons, maybe not so specific.
No, that's identical. Yeah.
So there's definitely room for the major track, digital curation, e-science, whether it's certificate or a full program for people who are going through school. But there's also a place for people who may not be doing the fully, planning to come out as a curator, but people who are interested in a particular subject, those subjects should be dealing with data too. So what are the major data areas in the life sciences, and what are the particular issues that people have dealing with them, and what are the analysis softwares that are used, and that kind of information. It wouldn't be that hard to put together, and it would be enormously useful for anyone going into librarianship now.
So subject-specific data?
At least broad disciplinary specific, and if possible, subject-specific, some sense of what are the major categories of data being used.
Sure.
What are the important issues that people in that discipline are dealing with?
Yeah, no, I agree. And you have to have the subject expertise, in my view, in order to understand the data. Okay.
Actually, just a follow-up to that, that's a really good idea in terms of maybe even, team-taught approaches for courses, where you're working with a data curator and a, instructor who's going to do the life sciences or the medical sciences. So you're getting that approach and some internship opportunities or hypothetical cases, and what are you going to do? I would like to thank Terry for being on the hot seat here. And thank you for joining us. Thank you.